Have you ever watched someone quietly change a room without raising their voice? Without anger, just by refusing to give up their place? Imagine a busy airport, a black woman in a modest suit, boarding a flight with nothing but calm in her step and a briefcase full of dreams. She's not here for a show, she just wants to reach her next destination. But when her first-class seat is challenged by someone who believes she couldn't possibly belong there, everything stops. What would you do if the world asked you to move? Would you stand up or would you stay seated, knowing the cost might be greater than a missed flight? How many times does a person have to prove they belong before the world finally sees them? What happens next will not only ground a plane, but shake the hearts of everyone watching. Before we begin, if stories about dignity, justice, and everyday courage matter to you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us share voices that need to be heard. Now, settle in. This is a story you'll carry with you long after the plane has landed. The airport was unusually quiet for a Monday, the kind of stillness that made the rolling of suitcase wheels sound like thunder on marble floors. Dr. Nia Bennett walked slowly toward Gate 14A, her step steady, her mind anything but. She wore a soft gray pantsuit, not the sharp-edged designer kind you see on magazine covers, but something practical, comfortable, worn in. Her black leather briefcase, scuffed at the corners, had followed her through 4 continents and 7 acquisitions. Inside it sat a printed copy of a government contract worth $900 million. The ink was still drying, but none of that showed on her face. To the average onlooker, she looked like any other business traveler, not the youngest black woman to ever lead a federal technology consortium, not the woman Forbes just nicknamed the Quiet Force. See, not the reason an entire sector of East Coast logistics was about to be revolutionized. And Nia liked it that way. She checked the boarding display again. Flight 211 to Boston. On time. Her eyes drifted toward the seating chart printed on her phone. First class, seat 2D. Aisle, like she always chose. Easier on her back. Easier to exit without fanfare. She exhaled slowly, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked toward the gate. People glanced at her, a few with polite disinterest, some with surprise. A woman with skin like hers, traveling alone, first-class luggage, no assistant or badge of status. One man in a navy suit eyed her carry-on, as if expecting it to be mismatched. It wasn't. Every piece of her presence had been measured, intentional. But years of this had taught her something. Invisibility doesn't always come from being unseen. Sometimes it's from being seen, but dismissed. The gate attendant scanned her ticket with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Enjoy your flight." "Dr. Bennett?" she said automatically. Nia nodded once. She didn't need warmth. She needed altitude. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the temperature cooled. The scent of recycled air and synthetic carpet filled her lungs. She welcomed it. It meant distance, a bubble from the world below, a temporary pause in the grind. The flight attendant at the door greeted her with a trained smile. "Welcome aboard." Nia returned the smile. Polite. Controlled. She glanced down the first-class cabin and located 2D, her seat, second row, right side, aisle. She placed her briefcase in the overhead bin gently. Then she slid into the leather seat, straightened her blazer, and pulled out her tablet. Her stylus hovered over a diagram of a logistics hub outside Baltimore. She made a quick note in the margin, her brow furrowed in thought. She didn't notice the boarding crowd growing behind her. Not until a loud voice rang out. "Excuse me," the voice said, thick with practiced authority. She looked up. A man stood beside her. white, late 50s, expensive coat, gold watch just peeking from his cuff. He looked down at her, then at the seat number above, then back at her confused, then condescending. "You might be in the wrong seat. Ma'am, this is 2D. Nia blinked, took a breath, held his gaze. "Yes," she said calmly. "It is." The man chuckled. "It wasn't warm. No, I mean, that's my seat. You must be in the wrong row." She tilted her tablet slightly to the side, then reached into the side pocket of her blazer. Pulled out her boarding pass. It was printed clearly. Flight 2111. First class seat. 2D name, Dr. Nia Bennett. She held it up. The man squinted, then smiled tightly. "Well, that can't be right. I've been flying this route every week for 12 years. They always put me in 2D. Nia gave a polite, tight-lipped smile. "Well, today, they didn't." Passengers were beginning to look now. A few heads turned. Whispers began to buzz. The man looked past her, clearly expecting backup from the flight attendants. But no one moved. The younger of the two attendants was hovering near the galley, clearly uncertain. Nia waited. "Sir," she said finally, still seated, still calm, "would you like to show me your boarding pass?" He scoffed. "Oh, come on. You think I carry paper like some rookie traveler? Look, let's just sort this out with the crew." "Okay." He turned and waved over the attendant. "Excuse me, can you help? I believe this woman is sitting in my seat." The attendant, a woman in her 30s, took a moment too long to respond. She looked at Nia, then at the man, then back at Nia. Can I just see both your boarding passes?" she asked weakly. Nia held hers up again. The man patted his pockets, checked his phone, muttered something about an app not loading, still didn't show proof. The attendant hesitated. "Miss, would you mind just moving to another seat for now while we check the manifest? Maybe seat 3F? Just so we can get everyone settled." Nia blinked. Just once. She wasn't surprised. Not anymore. But she was tired. Tired of the way this dance always began the same. The doubt, the pause, the subtle question of whether she truly belonged. She folded her hands in her lap. "No," she said quietly. "I will not move. This is my seat." There was no anger in her tone, no loudness, just gravity. The man laughed again. Unbelievable. More whispers now. The flight hadn't even taken off, but something had already begun to rise. The air in the cabin began to shift, not in temperature, not in scent, but in tension. It settled over the passengers like fog, unseen, but impossible to ignore. Dr. Nia Bennett stayed seated. She kept her posture straight, chin level, eyes soft but unwavering. Her voice hadn't risen. Her body hadn't moved. But somehow, she had just tilted the balance of the entire aircraft. Douglas Whitmore was still standing, still fuming, still fishing through his phone, searching for the elusive digital boarding pass he swore proved he belonged there. Passengers were now half-turned in their seats. Some stared openly. Others peeked from behind their phones. The buzz of whispers hummed around row 2 like static in the air. The young flight attendant had returned with a forced smile that didn't match the dread in her eyes. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "we're just trying to avoid delays. I understand your frustration. Could we please escort you to another seat temporarily? I'll personally bring you back once we clarify the seating issue." Nia looked at her. She could hear the strain in the woman's voice, but it wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about how quickly people expected her to shrink, to yield, to disappear so the situation could be smoothed over and forgotten. Her fingers rested on the fabric of her blazer. Her thumb pressed lightly against her wrist, grounding her. She could feel the familiar weight rising in her chest. The old feeling, not rage, not even anger, but the ache of being doubted. Again. She had spoken at UN summits, sat at tables with presidents, funded STEM programs in neighborhoods that hadn't seen a school lab in decades, and yet, here she was on a commercial flight in row 2 being told her presence might delay everyone else's comfort. "No," Nia said again, gently but firmly. "I will remain in my seat." The flight attendant blinked, unsure what to do next. She nodded awkwardly and stepped back. Douglas's frustration cracked. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "She's holding up the entire plane for some kind of stunt. I've been in this seat more times than I can count." Someone 2 rows back coughed. A woman nearby muttered, "Just show your boarding pass, then." Douglas turned, flustered. "I told you it's on the app. It's not loading. I shouldn't have to prove anything. They know me here." Nia didn't respond. She didn't have to. Instead, she slowly reached into her carry-on bag. She wasn't angry. She was focused. One tap, then another. Her screen lit up. She opened her secure app and scrolled through her recent calls. Her thumb hovered. She pressed call. The phone rang once. Then a voice answered. "Yes, Dr. Bennett Yasmin," Nia said softly. "I'm on flight 2111. Seat 2D. There's a dispute. I need intervention. Please advise the airline's counsel directly." "Thank you." She hung up, didn't explain herself, didn't raise her voice. She simply returned the phone to her lap and folded her hands again. Douglas scoffed louder. "Who are you even calling?" "Your lawyer, please. We don't need threats here." Another passenger in first class spoke for the first time. A man in his 40s with a quiet voice. "Maybe if you just showed your boarding pass, we could all be in the air by now." Douglas spun halfway toward him. "This isn't your business," he snapped. But the man didn't back down. It became everyone's business when the plane stopped moving. There was a sudden realization in the cabin. The door hadn't closed. The seatbelt sign remained dark. The pilot had not yet greeted them with his usual welcome aboard. Flight 211 was frozen, and the cause wasn't technical. It was ethical. A minute passed, then another. Nia said nothing. She stared straight ahead, calm and still. And then, somewhere near the front of the plane, a flight attendant picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are temporarily grounded while we resolve a legal seating matter. Please remain in your seats." Silence followed. Stunned silence. It washed over the passengers like a wave. Douglas's face went pale. "Wait." What he whispered. He looked at the attendant who had spoken. "You can't be serious." Because of this, the attendant didn't answer. He turned back to Nia. "What did you do?" he asked. Voice low. Nia looked at him for the first time in several minutes. Her expression was soft. Not angry, not smug, just tired. "I made a call," she said. "That's all." The captain appeared at the front of the cabin. He walked slowly down the aisle, his hat tucked under one arm, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of row 2. "Dr. Bennett?" he asked gently. She looked up. "Yes." He gave a slow nod. "I've received a message from legal. We're reviewing the seating manifest again. We apologize for the disruption." Nia inclined her head slightly. "Thank you, Captain." Then the captain turned to Douglas. "Sir, I'm going to ask you once more. Please pull up your boarding pass. If you cannot access it, we will have the ground crew assist you once we disembark." Douglas opened and closed his mouth. Still no boarding pass. The captain didn't press him. He simply looked over at the flight attendant. "Hold the aircraft," he said. "No one moves until this is resolved properly." Then he turned and walked back up the aisle. Passengers exhaled. Phones were lifted. Some began recording quietly, not to shame, but to remember, because something unusual was happening. A woman refused to move, and the world paused. It had been 8 minutes since the flight was supposed to leave the gate. Inside the cabin of Flight 211 time felt stretched. Tension had saturated the air like humidity before a storm. Words were few. Eyes did the speaking now. Glances exchanged between passengers said everything. And yet, in seat 2D, Dr. Nia Bennett sat unmoved. Her back rested softly against the leather. Her fingers were clasped in her lap, her breathing even. The buzz of the jet's idle systems hummed around her like a slow mechanical heartbeat. She wasn't looking for a fight. She never had been. But here she was again, pressed against an invisible line that others assumed she wouldn't cross. A line drawn not on a boarding pass, but in unspoken rules about who deserves to be where. She knew these moments well, too well. A different flight, a different city, the same silence from those who should have known better. Nia looked ahead, not at Douglas Whitmore, who was now seated awkwardly on the armrest of 2E like a man forced to acknowledge he may have been wrong. Not at the other passengers, who had fallen into a quiet observation mode, but into her own thoughts. She remembered a morning when she was 10. Her mother, Irene, had dressed her in a hand-me-down church dress and taken her to the district spelling bee. When Nia spelled sovereignty correctly in the final round, there had been a pause before the judges clapped. The boy beside her, blonde, neat, polished, had looked confused. Later, one of the judges told Irene quietly that Nia's demeanor might come off as overconfident. Her mother hadn't flinched. She'd only smiled and said, "She's not overconfident. She just knows exactly where she belongs." Nia blinked back into the present. The flight attendant returned. A different one this time. Older, sharper, clearly summoned because the situation had escalated. Her name tag read Rhonda. She leaned down and spoke in a lowered voice, the kind that carried an edge of authority masked in calm professionalism. "Dr. Bennett, I fully understand this is frustrating. We are doing our best to sort the manifest. I just want to offer a temporary solution that would allow us to get the flight underway." Nia said nothing yet. She let the pause sit. Rhonda continued. "We have an open seat in 3F. Same cabin. First class. It's by the window. If you're willing to sit there just while we sort this out with ground staff, I promise we'll make you whole afterward. Make you whole." Nia repeated the phrase silently, not to question the words themselves, but what they implied, as if her presence in that seat, her insistence on staying where she had been assigned, had somehow created a problem that needed repair, as if she had broken something. Nia's voice came slowly, intentionally. "Would you ask a man to do the same thing?" If the roles were reversed, Rhonda didn't answer, not directly. She straightened slightly, looked around the cabin, then returned her gaze. "I'm just trying to avoid further delay." "I understand," Nia said, "but this isn't a delay of my making." Rhonda opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it. She nodded, more out of protocol than agreement, and turned away. Nia's phone buzzed once. She glanced down. A message from Yasmin Cruz. "Legal has reached Delta Air's in-house team. Cabin is frozen until manifest is confirmed." Sit tight. You are supported. Supported. That word caught her off guard. She had spent most of her career building her own scaffolding, holding up her name, her work, her value, with hands that often trembled in private, though no one ever saw it. Now, someone else was holding the line. She let her shoulders relax just a little. Douglas was muttering now, still fumbling with his phone. "You know, this is just theater," he said toward no one in particular, entitled People Making Scenes. "You don't see real professionals acting like this." A young man across the aisle cleared his throat. "Real professionals usually carry their boarding pass." Douglas glared, but said nothing. Another minute passed, then another. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are still reviewing a legal seating matter and will resume boarding once resolved. Please remain seated and refrain from standing in the aisles." Cabin crew moved down the aisles, whispering reassurances, collecting glances like tolls along a silent highway. Some passengers were growing visibly uncomfortable. An older couple in row 1 shifted. A woman in 3A began quietly typing on her laptop, but kept sneaking glances forward. One by one, the subtle dynamics of the cabin changed. People who might have once assumed Douglas was right now looked unsure. A few even looked ashamed. And still, Nia sat. She could feel her heartbeat now. Slow, measured, but underneath that, something sharper. Not anger, conviction. She wasn't just holding a seat. She was holding the line for every time someone had asked a black woman to give something up to keep the peace. A pause. Then the sound of soft footsteps. The captain appeared again. He approached carefully, kneeled beside her row. His voice was low, private. "Dr. Bennett," he said, "we've confirmed the manifest. You are, without question, assigned to 2D. Nia nodded. "Calm, I'm not surprised." He glanced at Douglas, whose mouth hung half open. "Mr. Whitmore," the captain continued. "Louder now. Your seat is listed as 3C. Douglas opened his mouth, closed it. "Look," he said. "I assumed that was your mistake," the captain said, cutting gently but clearly. Then he stood up, addressed the cabin. "The delay has been resolved. Thank you for your cooperation." Nia said nothing. She didn't need to. She had already said everything. Without moving, without shouting, without giving up her place. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady but low, like a heartbeat trying to stay calm under pressure. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to gray, a thin layer of clouds settling over the tarmac. Somewhere out there, planes were taking off as scheduled. People were moving forward, but not here. Here, the air was heavy, not with smoke, not with storm, but with discomfort, unspoken, charged, thick. Nia Bennett remained still. The crew had resolved the seating issue officially. The captain had spoken. The manifest had been confirmed. She was in her rightful seat. But the silence, after a confrontation, that was its own kind of turbulence. She closed her eyes briefly and allowed herself a breath. Just one. She didn't want to cry, not because of shame, but because she was exhausted. People think it's the big moments that wear you down. But it's not. It's the accumulation, the 1,000 paper cuts of assumption, the constant recalculating of how to say no without being labeled difficult, of how to assert your presence without being called aggressive, of how to exist and still be palatable. And now, here she was again, on a plane, in a seat she had paid for, holding still so that no one could say she overreacted. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, smoothed the crease on her lap. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, small. Because when you're a black woman in rooms where people think you don't belong, every inch you take is examined. Every breath you draw is measured. She opened her eyes and looked ahead. Douglas Whitmore had finally moved to his actual seat 3C, though not without a long, bitter glare as he passed her row. Now. He sat with his arms crossed, staring straight ahead, lips pressed into a line. He hadn't apologized. Of course he hadn't. In his mind, the world had simply corrected itself, and the moment was already forgotten. But not for her. Nia knew it would stay with her. Later tonight, when she arrived in Boston, tomorrow, when she walked into a government meeting to finalize the largest contract of her career. Next week, when she saw another young black woman adjust her voice to sound less confident during a presentation because someone once told her to be more team-friendly. This moment would echo. And in that quiet space between seconds, a memory surfaced. She was 17. It was the morning of her interview for the National Young Innovator Scholarship, the most prestigious STEM award in the country. She had stayed up all night polishing her pitch on climate modeling for urban infrastructure. Her mother had made her oatmeal that morning, like she always did when something big was coming. Irene Bennett had been wearing her favorite yellow apron, the one with the fading green embroidery. "Rise in power," it said, before Nia left. Irene had stood at the door, her eyes searching her daughter's face. "Don't let them take your voice," she said. Nia had laughed. "It's just a panel." "Mama." "No," her mother had said gently. "It's never just a panel." She had been right. That day, one of the judges had asked Nia where she was really from, had complimented her articulation, had suggested her prototype must have had help from her school. Nia had smiled through all of it. She had won. And yet, when they handed her the award, part of her still felt like she was borrowing the moment from someone else. Because dignity sometimes comes with a cost. The plane jolted gently as the jet bridge detached. The crew began final safety checks. A voice over the intercom asked passengers to ensure their tray tables were up and seat backs upright. A woman across the aisle caught Nia's eye. Middle-aged, Latina. She didn't say anything, just gave her a look, a mix of solidarity and something close to apology. Nia offered a nod in return. There was no need for words. The captain came over the speaker again. "This is your captain speaking. We're next in line for takeoff. Our estimated arrival in Boston remains unchanged. Thank you again for your patience." The man in 1A let out a quiet sigh of relief. Someone behind Nia clicked their seatbelt twice, a nervous tick. Everything was returning to normal, at least on the surface, but not for Nia. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and pulled out a small photo. It was creased from being folded so many times. A picture of her niece, Lena, standing in front of a chalkboard with equations scribbled across it in pink marker. She had sent the photo a week ago. "I want to be like you," the message had read. Nia stared at the image for a moment, her thumb brushing the corner. That was why she couldn't move. That was why she stayed seated when the world wanted her to shrink. Because the moment she gave in not just to the man, but to the systems that enabled him, another little girl would be told to do the same. And maybe that girl wouldn't know yet how to say no, how to resist quietly. But she would remember seeing someone who did. She tucked the photo back into her pocket as the plane began to roll forward. The engines roared a little louder. Her heart steadier now. This wasn't over. Not really. There would be other flights, other rooms, other moments. But today, she had drawn a line, and she had not stepped back. The plane had begun to move. The quiet thrum of the engines had rolled through the fuselage, promising forward motion, yet as quickly as that promise arrived, it vanished. With a gentle shudder, Flight 211 came to a complete stop on the taxiway. The lights outside the windows seemed to freeze in place, little dots of gold on a steel-blue landscape. Inside, a hush settled over the cabin. It was not the peaceful kind of hush that signals anticipation, but the heavy kind that makes every breath feel louder than it should be. "Doctor." Nia Bennett sat as she had for the past half hour, hands folded, mind alert. This was not the silence of rest. It was the silence of 1,000 thoughts crowding at once. She looked down at her knees, then let her gaze drift to the aisle, where crew members now spoke to each other in low, urgent voices. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay. We are temporarily holding our position due to an unresolved legal concern. We ask for your patience and cooperation." Legal concern. The words echoed in the minds of the passengers, each interpreting them in their own way. Some guessed at paperwork, others at technicalities. A few understood more than they let on. Nia felt the attention shift to her like a current. No one stared outright, but she could sense the eyes, some curious, some sympathetic, a few judgmental. She exhaled, slow and silent. She knew how quickly the tide of opinion could shift. How, in the court of public perception, a black woman's insistence on fairness could be twisted into a story about disruption or ego. How easily the desire for order and convenience could outweigh justice in the eyes of those who simply wanted to get on with their day. She watched the hands of the watch on the passenger beside her. The seconds ticked by in an uneasy rhythm. Rhonda, the older flight attendant, returned to the first-class cabin. Her face was drawn. She stopped at Nia's row and spoke quietly. "Dr. Bennett, I want you to know that this situation is being handled at the highest level. I am sorry you're having to go through this." Nia looked up, meeting Rhonda's eyes. She saw exhaustion there, but also, maybe, a flicker of respect. "Thank you," Nia replied, voice calm. Rhonda moved away, continuing her rounds. She offered the same calm words to Douglas Whitmore, who merely grunted in response, jaw clenched tight. Another 2 minutes passed. No one in the cabin reached for the call button. No one stood up to complain. The silence became its own form of protest, a collective, reluctant acknowledgement that something important was happening, even if most did not understand its full weight. Nia's phone vibrated in her lap. She opened it discreetly and saw a message from Yasmin Cruz. "Corporate has intervened. Legal team in direct contact with airline execs. Ground crew not permitted to proceed until resolution. You are supported. Stay steady." Nia closed her eyes for a moment. The word supported felt almost foreign. She realized how rare it was to feel as if the world might stop, just for a moment, to consider her dignity. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat steady but strong. All her life, she had been taught to keep moving, to swallow discomfort, to keep the peace for others, to survive by blending in, not standing out. But this moment was different. She was not moving. The entire plane was not moving. And somehow, that stillness felt like a kind of power. She turned her head and looked out the window. The city lights stretched out beyond the airport fence. Millions of tiny stories happening at once. For a moment, her own felt impossibly small. Yet near reasons she could not fully name. It mattered deeply now. A child behind her began to fuss, the only real noise in the entire section. The child's mother, flustered, murmured apologies to those around her. Nia caught the mother's eye and offered a small, reassuring smile. Sometimes, a quiet nod was all it took to shift a mood. Time did not rush. It crawled. 5 minutes felt like 50. The captain's voice sounded again. Softer this time. More human. Thank you for your patience. We understand this delay is frustrating. Please know that our team is working to resolve this as quickly and fairly as possible. There was a kind of vulnerability in the way he said fairly, as if the word itself had become a rare commodity. Douglas shifted in his seat. He muttered under his breath, "All this, over a seat." A woman in 2A glanced at him, then at Nia. Her eyes were dark and tired. She spoke quietly, not to start a fight, but simply to set the record straight. "It's not just a seat," she said. The words hung in the air. Nia met the woman's gaze, nodding ever so slightly. Not just a seat. It was a place at the table, a marker of worth, a reminder that dignity was not something to be negotiated in exchange for convenience. The minutes crawled on. Nia replayed every choice she had made since boarding. The countless ways she had learned to protect herself never let her frustration show, never let her voice shake. Always have the proof in writing. Always leave room for someone else's comfort before her own. She wondered, briefly, if it would have been easier to move, to accept the offer and slide into the background, to let someone else claim the space she had earned. But then she thought of Lena, her niece, holding that chalk-stained photo and dreaming bigger. Nia pressed her lips together, a small act of defiance. She stayed. Finally, the captain's voice returned one last time. "We will update you momentarily. Thank you for your patience." The plane remained grounded for 5 long minutes. A black woman's quiet refusal had brought a jetliner to a halt. And in that silence, something shifted not just in Nia, but in everyone who watched. 5 minutes of stillness, 5 minutes of waiting. It was enough time for nerves to unravel and for truths to inch their way to the surface. The crew was moving quietly, purposefully. The younger flight attendant was at the front, tapping something into her tablet. Rhonda had returned to the galley, her face unreadable. In the aisle, passengers traded looks, some annoyed, some curious, others thoughtful, as if seeing this story was helping them remember something long forgotten. Dr. Nia Bennett sat with her head held high. She gazed down at her hands, fingers resting gently on her briefcase. In that moment, her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. It wasn't a silence of defeat. It was the silence of someone who had chosen dignity over drama. The silence of a woman who understood that the loudest person in the room is not always the one in charge. Suddenly, movement at the front. Captain Elias Grant stepped into the first-class cabin. He carried a slim folder in one hand. His steps were deliberate. He paused at row 2. Just beside Nia, Dr. Bennett, he said, voice soft but clear. Nia met his eyes. She saw a flicker of recognition there and understanding of what had been at stake. "Yes, Captain." He nodded and spoke so the nearby passengers could hear, but with a gravity that made everyone lean in. "We have completed our review. Your seat, 2D, is correctly assigned to you. Our records confirm your reservation. There is no dispute." A subtle shift rippled through the cabin. The people in the closest rows let out breath they didn't know they were holding. Captain Grant turned to Douglas Whitmore, who still sat stiffly in 3C. His jaw worked, his face flushed. He was cornered not by force, but by fact. "Mr. Whitmore," the captain said, "your boarding pass was assigned to seat 3C. If there was a change, it was not registered in our system. We will be happy to help you with any concern once we are in the air. For now, you are required to remain in your assigned seat." Douglas tried to muster indignation, but it wilted in the face of simple evidence. He stammered, "I always have 2D. It's always been my seat. You know me. You know my record." The captain regarded him calmly. "Records do not override assignments. We rely on documentation. Today, 2D is Dr. Bennett's seat." There was a pause. Then Douglas settled back, eyes fixed on the window. Nia let out a breath, not of relief, but of confirmation. She had not doubted herself, but having her position acknowledged, in public, was a rare balm. Captain Grant nodded at her again. "Thank you for your patience, Dr. Bennett." She nodded in return. "Thank you for your professionalism, Captain." He straightened, took a moment to scan the nearby faces, then left the cabin with the quiet authority that only truth can grant. As the captain disappeared, conversation began to murmur through the aisles. Someone in the back applauded once, quietly, then stopped, as if not wanting to make a spectacle out of someone else's battle. The young flight attendant returned, smiling nervously. "We'll be closing the door soon. Would you like a drink?" "Dr. Bennett," Nia smiled, finally allowing herself a small, genuine warmth. "Some water, please. Thank you." The attendant nodded and left. For the first time since boarding, Nia allowed herself to sink a bit into her seat. Her muscles ached with the effort of holding herself so still, so upright. She was aware that people were still watching her. But now their looks had changed. There was no more suspicion, no more discomfort. Instead, she saw a quiet respect. Even the few who had rolled their eyes at the beginning now seemed to realize that something important had happened. As she sipped her water, Nia looked around. She caught the eye of the woman in 2A, who gave a tiny nod. Nia nodded back. An unspoken bond formed in a split second. The plane's engines revved, signaling that movement would begin soon. But before they could push back, a voice came from further down the aisle. It was Douglas. He spoke not to Nia, but to the air, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the entire cabin. "I still don't see why this had to go so far. It's just a seat." A hush fell again. All eyes turned to Nia. She met his gaze evenly. It was never just about the seat. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice calm but powerful. "It's about respect. About being seen. About not being asked to move for someone else's comfort." He didn't respond. The flight attendant at the front closed the main door. The heavy seal echoed through the cabin, a punctuation mark on the morning story. Captain Grant's voice came over the intercom, this time with a note of reassurance. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will be taxiing shortly. Please remain seated and enjoy your flight." As the plane rolled away from the gate, Nia's heart steadied. She had not shouted. She had not threatened. She had simply remained and insisted on being seen. And as the plane lifted off, rising above the clouds, she felt a quiet pride, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been asked to step aside so someone else could feel more at home. Today, she had stayed, and that was enough. As the plane taxied down the runway, a new kind of quiet filled the first-class cabin. Not the brittle silence of tension, but the softer hush that follows a storm. The moment of truth had passed. but its ripples were still moving through every row, every aisle, every heart. Doctor, Nia Bennett adjusted her seatbelt with slow, careful fingers. Her body felt the ache of adrenaline, the quiet shiver that always followed the need to be strong in front of strangers. She caught herself in that small movement, how she checked the angle of her shoulders, the tilt of her chin, the space she took up. It was a habit built over years of trying to never appear too big, too proud, too demanding. The flight attendants were moving about, closing overhead bins, offering soft words to passengers, collecting stray blankets left in the rush of earlier commotion. Rhonda paused beside Nia, her posture finally relaxing. She didn't say anything, but the way she lingered for a second longer than necessary spoke volumes. A small child in row 3 peeked over the seat back, eyes wide and curious. Nia smiled gently at her. The girl's mother caught Nia's eye, and for just a second, something warm passed between them, a silent promise that some battles are fought not only for ourselves, but for those who will come after. Douglas Whitmore remained slouched in his seat, his gaze fixed on the pattern of the upholstery, hands clasped tight. He looked diminished, not just by circumstance, but by the realization that his assumed privilege had met its match in something he could not manipulate: the manifest, the evidence, the truth itself. The younger flight attendant, her nerves no longer quite so visible, came by with the manifest folder. She reviewed the assignments, double-checking, her hands steady now. She reached Nia's row and met her eyes directly. "I apologize again for the mix-up," she said, voice soft but clear. "Your presence was on the manifest all along." Nia nodded. "Thank you for double-checking. I appreciate your professionalism." The attendant glanced over at Douglas, then moved on down the aisle. Nia saw her exhale as she walked away, the relief plain on her face. The engines roared as the plane began its ascent. The cabin lights dimmed, and for a moment, the world outside the small oval windows disappeared into clouds. Nia leaned back and closed her eyes. She let the gentle rocking of the ascent cradle her body. Let her thoughts drift back through the year's other flights, other meetings, other rooms where she had to prove herself over and over again. She remembered an incident at her first job out of graduate school. A project manager had assumed she was there to take notes, not lead the engineering team. He had smiled politely, then addressed every technical question to the men in the room. It had stung, but she had learned to answer each question anyway, softly but firmly, until there was no doubt who held the answers. She learned then that some people trust the manifest only when it matches what they already believe. Now, as the plane leveled out and the seatbelt sign faded, the world inside the cabin seemed subtly altered. The passengers were quieter, more thoughtful. A few smiled as Nia passed by to use the restroom. A man in business casual attire said quietly, "Good for you." She nodded her thanks, feeling the words settle in her chest. Returning to her seat, she found a handwritten note on her tray table. "Thank you for holding your ground. For my daughter. For all of us." It was unsigned. She looked up, searching for the author, but no one met her gaze directly. It did not matter. The words were enough. She slid the note into her briefcase, next to the photo of Lena. The meal service began. Nia accepted a small tray of fruit and sparkling water. Her appetite was absent, but she needed the normalcy, the simple, ordinary act of eating in the air, like any other passenger. Douglas did not look up. He stared into his coffee, the steam rising, dissipating into nothing. Nia wondered what he was thinking now, if he regretted his actions. if he saw himself in a new light, or if he would simply carry the story as one more example of how the world was changing in ways he could not control. She thought about forgiveness, about whether she owed him any, or if it was enough to simply release herself from anger. She did not wish him harm. She only wanted the space to move through the world without always having to brace for battle. Outside the window, the sky had cleared. The sun was streaming over the wing, scattering golden light across the clouds below. It was the kind of view that always made Nia feel limitless, even on the days she was made to feel small. She pressed her hand gently against the cool plastic of the window. The world looked quiet from this height, troubles flattened by distance. But she knew that the ground was always waiting, that real change happened when you landed, when you chose to carry the story forward. As the cabin settled into the steady rhythm of flight, Nia closed her eyes and let herself rest. The battle was over for now, but its meaning lingered. She felt it in every breath, in the softened glances, in the silent gratitude of strangers. She thought of Lena, waiting at home, and hoped that one day her niece would live in a world where the manifest was enough, where worth was never up for debate, where seats were simply seats, and dignity was a given, not a negotiation. The seatbelt sign chimed on again, and Nia opened her eyes to the gentle reminder. She fastened her belt, sat up a little straighter, and prepared for the next part of the journey, knowing she would carry the quiet strength of this moment wherever she went. The meal trays had been cleared. The cabin was quiet, except for the low hum of engines and the gentle clinking of glasses from the galley. Sunlight played along the overhead bins, painting moving shapes across the aisle. Nia Bennett sat in her seat, posture composed, gaze forward. She could sense a change in the air, the kind that comes not with loud applause but with a shared acknowledgement. The moment of confrontation had passed, but the lessons lingered. Douglas Whitmore still sat in 3C, his shoulders hunched, face turned away from the rest of the cabin. Every so often, he shifted in his seat as if the cushion had become uncomfortable. His bravado had wilted. In its place was a heavy silence that felt almost like regret, though Nia knew better than to expect an apology. Sometimes, the world offered no words for the wounds it inflicted. Nia glanced down at her hands. They were steady now, no longer curled in quiet defense. She let her palms rest flat on her lap and drew a slow breath. Across the aisle, the young mother who had watched earlier now caught Nia's eye again. She mouthed the words, "Thank you." Nia offered her a gentle nod, the kind her own mother would have given a small gift of grace in a world so often starved of it. The memory of her mother's voice was strong today, as if Irene Bennett had slipped into the cabin with her, whispering wisdom just behind her shoulder. She remembered sitting on the porch back in Georgia, dust settling around them, cicadas singing in the tall grass. "You have to hold your space," Irene would say, "because if you don't, the world will shrink you down until you forget who you ever were." Nia smiled to herself, feeling the truth of those words deep in her bones. A gentle bump of turbulence shook the cabin, reminding everyone of the vulnerability of flight. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and the attendants moved quietly, checking latches and straps. Rhonda approached Nia, her face softened now, her voice more personal than professional. "Is there anything else we can do to make you comfortable, Doctor?" Bennett. Nia shook her head. "No, thank you. You've done your job." Rhonda hesitated for a moment, then added, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I want you to know we're taking it seriously." We've filed a report. The airline will be reviewing what happened. Thank you. Rhonda, Nia said. It means more than you think. Rhonda nodded, then moved down the aisle to check on other passengers. There was no drama now, only the soft unfolding of responsibility. Nia knew that in some stories, justice looked like handcuffs or headlines. Here, it was quieter, a note in a file, a conversation in a back office, a ripple of change that might outlast the flight. She let her mind drift back to the summer after high school. She had been invited to a science camp, one of only 3 black students in a class of 70. The counselors had called her Nina for days, never bothering to read her name tag. When she corrected them, one counselor had laughed. What's the difference? The difference, she'd learned, was everything. Yet she had stayed, finished every project, built the strongest bridge in the group's design challenge. When the awards were handed out, her bridge was recognized. For a moment, she was seen for her work and not her difference. But the next morning, the cafeteria still greeted her as Nina. That was the lesson she carried into adulthood sometimes. The world changes slowly, but you cannot let it slow you down. Now, on this plane, she had chosen not to move. She had refused to disappear. In her stillness, she had reclaimed something many people never realize they have the right to presence. As the flight continued, a quiet settled over her. She found herself breathing more deeply, the ache in her chest loosening. She looked out the window, watching the sun glint off the clouds, the land far below shrinking to the size of memory. She thought of Lena, her niece, and imagined the questions she might ask when Nia told her about this flight. Would Lena understand why her aunt refused to give up her seat? Would she be proud or confused or both? Nia promised herself she would tell Lena the truth. She would tell her it was not just about a chair in the sky. It was about holding a place in the world, about insisting on respect, even when it would be easier to give in. It was about courage that sometimes looked like stillness, not shouting. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and steady. We are beginning our initial descent into Boston. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. We will be landing soon. A new energy moved through the cabin. Passengers tucked away laptops and books. Seatbacks clicked upright. Nia felt her pulse quicken, not with anxiety, but with anticipation. As the attendants did their final checks, Rhonda paused at Douglas's row. She spoke to him softly, too quietly for Nia to hear. But when Rhonda walked away, Douglas's face had changed. He looked smaller, more uncertain. For a fleeting moment, Nia felt a flicker of compassion. Everyone is learning, she reminded herself, even those who resist it most. The landing gear deployed with a gentle thump. The city came into view beneath the clouds, a patchwork of rooftops, rivers, and late afternoon light. As the plane touched down, applause broke out somewhere near the back. Nia smiled, maybe for the safe landing, maybe for something more. She sat a little taller, feeling every inch of space she occupied. When the doors opened and the passengers began to disembark, Nia remained in her seat a moment longer, breathing in the simple satisfaction of having stayed. Justice had not come with a bang. It had arrived on quiet feet, in the simple act of not giving up what was hers. The plane glided onto the runway with a gentle thud, slowing to a crawl as the city of Boston unfolded beyond the windows. Evening light streamed through the oval glass, painting golden lines across the cabin. The world outside seemed ready to keep moving, hungry to swallow up the drama and urgency of the day. But inside the first-class section, something had shifted, a collective hush, soft and searching. lingered long after the wheels had touched the ground. Dr. Nia Bennett stayed seated as the other passengers began to stir. Overhead, bins creaked open, bags slid out with practiced hands. The usual urgency to get off the plane was there, but muted, as if everyone was aware that something real and uncomfortable had just happened in the air above the world. Nia kept her eyes on the seat back in front of her. She felt the weight of everything that had occurred, but it rested on her like a mantle, not a burden. She had not lost anything here. If anything, she had reclaimed something she had too often been asked to give away: her right to remain, her right to belong, her right to take up space. She watched as Douglas Whitmore stood, head down, grabbing his briefcase. He moved toward the aisle, looking everywhere but at her. It was the look of a man searching for the nearest exit from discomfort. She felt a flicker of sympathy, but she did not mistake it for forgiveness. He would have to find that within himself, or not at all. As the plane door opened and the first rows began to file out, a soft whisper drifted from across the aisle. "Thank you," the young mother said again, this time loud enough for Nia to hear. Nia turned and met her gaze. The woman's daughter clutched her arm. Eyes bright, Nia smiled. Small, but warm. "You're welcome," she replied quietly. "I hope she remembers this. I hope we all do." The mother nodded. There were no more words, but the message had been sent and received. As Nia gathered her things, she felt the brush of a sleeve beside her. The woman from 2A paused, her hand light on Nia's shoulder. "My daughter's starting high school this fall," she said. "I want her to be able to hold her seat too." Nia felt emotion rise in her throat. She nodded, unsure if she could trust her voice, so she let her eyes say the rest. Other passengers exited without comment, but their glances lingered longer than usual. Some were apologetic, some grateful, some simply thoughtful. Every step they took down the narrow aisle felt like a silent acknowledgement that something had been witnessed, something that demanded reflection. Rhonda, the senior flight attendant, met Nia at the exit. The bustle of passengers behind them created a quiet pocket, an island of calm at the front of the plane. "I'll be filing a detailed report," Rhonda said in a low voice, "and I've already spoken to the team about bias training. It's overdue." Nia nodded, gratitude blooming quietly in her chest. "Thank you. Rhonda, I hope it helps someone down the line." Rhonda's face softened. "It already has." As Nia stepped into the jet bridge, the chill of the air outside felt sharper, clearer. She inhaled deeply, savoring the small victory, the way the world felt a fraction lighter with each footfall away from the past few hours. In the terminal, the crowd moved as one river, all purpose and anticipation. But Nia let herself walk slowly. She did not want to rush out of this moment. There was dignity in the slowness, in choosing her own pace after being told to hurry, to yield, to move aside so many times before. She made her way to the baggage claim. Her phone buzzed a message from Lena. "Auntie, are you here yet? Did you win?" Nia smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard before she replied. "I'm here, and yes, I did." She set her phone down and scanned the crowd. Faces flashed by businessmen in dark suits, families with toddlers, students with backpacks. None of them knew what had happened on Flight 211, but somehow Nia felt connected to all of them. A journalist from a local station was waiting by the arrivals gate, microphone in hand, eyes scanning the crowd. As Nia passed, the woman hesitated, then approached. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Bennett?" Nia stopped, measured her answer, then nodded. The journalist's voice was gentle, aware. I saw a post about your flight. Would you like to comment on what happened?" Nia thought for a moment. She didn't want to sensationalize the morning, didn't want her story twisted or diluted. She chose her words carefully. "I'd only like to say that respect shouldn't depend on who you are or where you're sitting. Everyone deserves dignity. Today, I just happened to be in a seat that belonged to me." The journalist nodded, lowering her microphone. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett." As she continued walking, Nia felt a sense of closure growing inside her. The confrontation, the waiting, the stares, it all had meaning because she had chosen to stay. Outside, the Boston air was brisk, scented with salt from the harbor. A driver held a sign with her name at the curb, smiling and greeting. "Dr. Bennett, welcome to Boston." Nia smiled, sliding into the car. As the city rolled past her window, she let her eyes close, letting the hum of the engine and the heartbeat of the city blend together. She knew that the journey wasn't over. There would always be more rooms, more tables, more flights. But today, the world had shifted. Just a little, in her direction. And somewhere, maybe on another flight, another woman might find it a bit easier to hold her seat. The city of Boston shimmered in the late afternoon light as Dr. Nia Bennett's car made its way through busy streets, past the red brick facades of old warehouses and the glass towers of new ambition. The pulse of the city was different from Atlanta's warmth or DMIC's gravitas, but Nia felt a kinship with its energy. Here, too, people came to prove themselves, to build something lasting, to be seen. In the quiet of the car, Nia checked her phone for messages. There were dozens missed calls from colleagues, texts from family, even a few emails from journalists. She ignored them all for now. Instead, she looked out the window, watching the world pass. Boston felt alive, the sidewalks crowded, the harbor shining silver in the distance. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. "Rough flight?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Nia considered how much to reveal. She settled on honesty, but simple. It was eventful. He nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. "We get all kinds coming through here. Glad you made it safe." She smiled, grateful for the space he gave her. As they reached the hotel, Nia stepped out into a crisp breeze, her briefcase in hand. The doorman greeted her with a professional smile, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply be a guest, not a symbol, not a story, just a woman arriving for a meeting. She checked in, moved through the elegant lobby, and entered her room. She placed her suitcase on the stand, took off her blazer, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence felt different now, not heavy but restorative. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling the weight of the day begin to fade. She unpacked only what she needed for the meeting: her portfolio, her laptop, the carefully organized contract documents. The ritual grounded her, gave her hands something to do while her mind processed the morning's events. As she organized her notes, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video notification, a news clip already circulating online. Someone on the plane had recorded the moment when she refused to give up her seat. Her calm refusal, the gentle firmness in her voice as she insisted on dignity. The headline read, "Black Woman CEO Holds Her Ground Flight Crew Grounds Jet in Support." She watched for a moment, seeing herself from the outside. The camera captured not only her, but the faces of the other passengers, the shifting emotions, the realization that something significant was unfolding. She paused the video and set the phone aside. Nia thought of her mother, Irene, and wished she could call her, hear her voice. soak in the warmth of her laughter. She closed her eyes, letting memory fill the room. She pictured Irene in her kitchen, hands dusted with flour, voice soft but firm. "You don't need to be loud, baby. The world will hear you if you stand for something real." The memory gave her strength. It also made her ache. She changed into a navy dress, checked her appearance in the mirror. She looked composed, even serene. Yet she knew that behind the calm was a deep well of feeling anger, pride, weariness, hope, all layered, all true. Before heading out, Nia took a moment to write a note to herself in her journal. "You are here because you earned it. You belong in every room you walk into." With that reminder, she slipped her journal into her bag and left her room. Downstairs, the hotel conference center was buzzing with life. Attendees for the Logistics Consortium's annual meeting were checking in, collecting badges, greeting each other with warm handshakes and knowing smiles. Nia was greeted by a colleague from her company, a young black woman named Amira, Dr. Bennett. "You made it. We were worried with all the flight delays." Nia smiled, her face relaxing. "I'm here and ready." Amira leaned in, lowering her voice. "People have been talking about you all day. That video, it's everywhere. You did good." Nia. For a moment, Nia felt exposed, as if her private battle had become public property. But she also felt seen in a new way, respected not for making noise, but for standing firm. The meeting began with opening remarks from the organizers. The hall was filled with the city's top business leaders, government officials, and tech innovators. Nia took her seat near the front, her name on a placard, her reputation preceding her. As the keynote speaker took the stage, Nia let her thoughts drift to Lena, wondering what her niece would say when she saw the video. Would she understand? Would she see not just the stand her aunt took, but the years of practice it took to be ready for that moment? The speaker's words washed over her, a call for innovation, for courage, for equity in business. Nia listened, absorbing not only the content, but the energy of the room, the hope, the ambition, the quiet hunger to make a difference. When it was her turn to speak, Nia stood with calm confidence. She introduced herself simply, outlined her vision for the future of logistics, spoke about the importance of trust, of fairness, of building systems that included everyone, not just those used to being in charge. Her words landed. The room listened. Afterward, as she mingled with colleagues, several approached her not only to talk business, but to thank her for what she had done on the plane. One woman said, "You made it easier for the next person to say no." That was all Nia needed. Later, alone in her hotel room, Nia called Lena for a bedtime chat. The little girl's voice was sleepy but excited. "Auntie Nia, did you win your meeting too?" Nia laughed softly. "I did. Lena, and I think we both won something bigger." She listened to Lena's breathing as she drifted to sleep, the gentle sound anchoring her. The city lights blinked outside her window. Nia looked at her reflection, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rooms, new flights. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, knowing she had landed, not just in Boston, but in her own sense of self. It did not take long for the world to find out what happened on Flight 211. By morning, the video had circled social media, collecting thousands of comments and shares. The hashtags trended. She took her seat. Dignity on board. Nia Bennett. Reporters called her hotel room nonstop. Her company's communications team reached out, asking if she wanted to make a statement. Nia stared at the ceiling for a long time before answering. She didn't want to become a symbol, a hashtag, a viral soundbite. She just wanted people to understand that what happened to her was not new. It was only new to those who hadn't been forced to choose between peace and dignity. Her phone flashed with texts from friends, from colleagues, from strangers. Many were supportive. Some told their own stories of being asked to move, to yield, to disappear for the comfort of others. There were angry messages, too, comments filled with disbelief or even resentment that she hadn't just let it go. Nia wrote out a message to her communications director. She read it over 3 times before hitting send. I will make a brief statement, nothing sensational. I want people to think about respect, not about me. When the press release went out, it was short and clear. Dignity is not about status. Dignity is the foundation of our humanity. You shouldn't need a title or a resume to be treated with respect. That's what I stood for on that plane. I hope it invites others to do the same, whenever and wherever they can. That was all she said. It was enough. The response was immediate. News outlets picked up her words. Editors ran think pieces on why these moments mattered, why bias still found its way into the smallest spaces, why it was never just about a seat. The airline issued its own apology by noon. They admitted the crew had mishandled the situation. They announced plans to review bias training, to change their escalation procedures, to listen more closely to passengers when disputes arose. Some believed it. Others rolled their eyes. But the company's commitment was now public. At her office, a spontaneous staff meeting broke out. Amira and the other team members ordered coffee and pastries, watching the story unfold on screens in the break room. When Nia entered, they clapped softly, not for the spectacle, but for the years they had watched her lead by example. "Proud of you, boss," Amira said, hugging her. Nia hugged her back. "Thank you for having my back. All of you." Emails poured in from clients and partners. One executive wrote, "We want to do business with companies led by people who stand for something." Another message simply read, "Thank you for teaching us what quiet strength looks like." But not all the feedback was warm. A handful of industry insiders called her disruptive. One man sent a private message suggesting she had embarrassed herself, the airline, and the business community. Nia read these messages, her hands steady. She replied to none. She knew that resistance was the cost of change. Outside her own world, parents began sharing the story with their children. Teachers mentioned her name in class, using the flight as a case study in social science and ethics. A college student created an artwork titled "Unmoved," painting Nia in her seat, hands folded, calm at the eye of a storm. A podcast reached out for an interview. The host, a black woman with a gentle voice, asked Nia what she would say to those who still thought these stories were exaggerations. Nia considered her answer. She spoke softly, aware that sometimes gentleness carried further than outrage. "I would say that the stories are not new. Only the witnesses are. Every time someone speaks up, the world gets a little wider, a little safer. For me, it was just one moment, but for someone else watching, it might be the moment they needed to see." That line traveled far, quoted and requoted, landing in places Nia would never visit. Days later, Douglas Whitmore's name reappeared in an industry newsletter. It was a small note stepping away for personal reasons. Nia wondered what he had learned, if anything. She did not feel triumphant. She only hoped he had spent some time listening, if not to her, then to his own conscience. Back at home. Lena waited for her aunt's return. The little girl ran to the door, waving her own homemade sign. It said, Welcome home, Auntie Nia. You're my hero. Nia lifted her niece up, hugging her tightly. Lena giggled. Did you really stop a whole plane? Nia grinned. No, baby. I just didn't let someone else decide where I belonged. Later that night, Nia sat on her back porch, listening to the song of the city. Her mother, Irene, called. Her voice was full of pride and worry. I saw you on the news. Nia, you did good, but don't let the world wear you out. Remember to rest. Nia closed her eyes, the words filling the spaces that still ached. I will, Mama. I promise. Her inbox continued to fill requests for interviews, offers to speak, opportunities she had never imagined. Nia turned most of them down. She didn't need to become a brand. She needed to remain herself. She needed to keep walking into rooms and claiming her space, for her own sake and for everyone watching. As she drifted off to sleep, Nia thought about all the seats in her life, the ones she had lost, the ones she had fought for, the ones she now held. She knew that the story would fade from headlines, as all stories do, but the ripple would remain. Maybe it would reach the right person in the right moment and remind them to hold their seat too. She smiled, her last thought before sleep, a quiet prayer for tomorrow's travelers. May they never have to ask twice for what is already theirs. Morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting a patchwork of gold on the table where Dr. Nia Bennett sat, coffee mug warming her hands. The news from the past week still echoed in every ping of her phone, every kind text and curious email. Yet here, in her home, the world felt quiet, almost untouched by all that noise. Lena, her niece, padded into the kitchen in her slippers, eyes wide and searching for breakfast. Nia smiled at the familiar sight. The days since Boston had passed in a blur of interviews and articles. But here, routine remained oatmeal with cinnamon, a slice of fruit, Lena's favorite cartoon humming in the background. Did you sleep well? Nia asked, stirring the pot. Lena nodded, her curls bouncing. I dreamed I was on a big airplane with you. You let me sit by the window. Nia's heart softened. We'll do that for real one day. She watched Lena eat, marveling at how children so easily claimed space for their joy. Nia wanted that for her niece, for every little girl with questions in her eyes and hope in her voice. As they finished breakfast, Nia walked Lena to the school bus, holding her small hand in hers. The world was waking up, parents waving, teachers waiting, the street full of everyday stories. As Lena hugged her goodbye, she looked up. Auntie Nia, when you said no on the plane, were you scared? Nia crouched, meeting her gaze. A little, but mostly. I wanted to make sure everyone knew I belonged there, just like everyone else. You remember that. Okay, never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Lena nodded solemnly. The bus doors closed, and Nia watched her go, the hope for a softer world burning bright. Back inside, Nia returned to her laptop. She sifted through her inbox offers, thanks, requests for interviews, and messages from people whose names she'd never known. There was a letter from an airline employee. Thank you for holding the line. You reminded us why our jobs matter. Another from a high school teacher. My students watched your video. They want to talk about dignity today. Nia wrote back where she could. Grateful, but careful. She knew her story was becoming something bigger than herself. That was both a privilege and a weight. Her mother called again that afternoon, voice carrying warmth through the line. I've seen your story everywhere. Nia, you did right. but I hope you know you can rest now. Let the world do some of the caring." Nia smiled. "I'm trying. Mama, I promise." Later that evening, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, letting the sounds of the city lull her into reflection. The trees rustled, cars hummed in the distance. Life continued its gentle rhythm. She opened her journal and wrote, "Today, I took my seat, not just on a plane, but in my life. I will not shrink. I will not apologize for my presence. I hope those watching find their own courage in their own way." She closed the journal and watched as dusk painted the sky in colors she'd always loved. Lavender, blue, gold. In that quiet, she let herself feel proud, not just for the stand she'd taken, but for the years of preparation, the quiet moments of doubt she'd survived, the lessons she'd learned from her mother, her niece, her own heart. Her phone buzzed once more, a final message from her colleague Amira. "Thank you for leading. Nia, for showing us how." Nia replied with a single line, "We lead together. Always." Night fell gently. In homes across the city, families were settling in. Somewhere, a young woman boarded a flight, clutching her own boarding pass a little tighter, sitting taller in her seat. Somewhere, a flight attendant remembered to check twice, to listen first, to see every passenger as someone who deserved to belong. The next morning, Nia would rise and return to her work, to boardrooms and meetings, to new challenges and triumphs. The world would not change overnight. She knew, but it had shifted, just a little, in the space of a quiet refusal to move. As she turned off the porch light, Nia thought about all the places she had yet to go. She knew there would be other flights, other seats, other moments when the world asked her to move for someone else's comfort. She was ready now, not just to hold her ground, but to lift others up beside her. She smiled, feeling the quiet certainty that her story would not end in headlines or hashtags, but in every small act of dignity, every person who chose not to give up their place. She took her seat, and the world watched. But more than that, the world learned. As sleep found her, Nia dreamed not of conflict, but of peace, of Lena soaring above the clouds, of women everywhere claiming their space, of a world where respect was as ordinary as breathing. And in the morning, Nia Bennett would rise, take her seat once again, and continue the journey, knowing that her stand had made the way just a little clearer for those who would follow. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Today, you witnessed what happens when dignity is challenged, when respect is denied, and when one person's quiet courage creates a ripple far beyond the cabin of a single plane. Discrimination, no matter how subtle or polite, hurts us all. But standing up, even silently, can inspire hope, awaken change, and remind us what it truly means to see and be seen. So let's choose compassion. Let's choose to stand beside those who refuse to be made invisible. Let's make sure every seat, everywhere, belongs to those who have earned it. If you believe in stories that celebrate strength, that honor resilience, and that challenge injustice, help us keep the conversation going. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us what's possible when we choose respect. We're just getting started. Thank you for being part of this community. Which story should we share next? Let us know in the comments below, and join us for the next flight, because together we can help every voice be heard.